When HOA President Margaret slapped my disabled daughter and ripped away her oxygen tube, she thought she was bullying a helpless family. She had no idea my mother was a CIA operative who'd spent decades protecting innocents from monsters exactly like her. Some mistakes you can't survive. Before watching full story, comment below from where you watching. Also like and subscribe for more stories. The courtroom was packed with neighbors, their whispered conversations creating a low hum that made my stomach twist with anxiety. I sat in the front row, my 16-year-old daughter Emma beside me in her wheelchair, her small hand trembling in mine. The oxygen tank beside her chair made soft hissing sounds as she breathed through the nasal cannula. Her pale face was turned toward the judge's bench, but I could see the fear in her bright blue eyes. This shouldn't have happened. None of this should have happened. It all started 6 months ago when we moved into Willowbrook Estates, a quiet suburban neighborhood with tree-lined streets and manicured lawns. Emma had been fighting a rare lung condition for 3 years, and after countless hospital stays, the doctors finally said she could come home with portable oxygen equipment. I thought a peaceful neighborhood would be perfect for her recovery. I was wrong. The first week was blissful. Emma sat on our front porch every morning, reading her books while breathing the fresh air through her oxygen tube. She loved watching the birds and waving at neighbors who walked by. Some even stopped to chat, asking about her condition with genuine concern. For the first time in years, I saw hope returning to my daughter's eyes. Then came the letter. It arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a woman with perfectly styled blonde hair and a permanent scowl. She introduced herself as Margaret Thornton, president of the Willowbrook Estates Homeowners Association. She wore a crisp white blouse and navy blazer, her clipboard clutched like a weapon. "I'm here about your daughter's medical equipment," she said, not bothering with pleasantries. "The oxygen tank and wheelchair are creating an unsightly appearance that violates our community standards." I stared at her, certain I'd misunderstood. "Excuse me?" Section 4.3 of our HOA agreement clearly states that no medical equipment or mobility devices shall be visible from the street. Your daughter's equipment is disrupting the aesthetic appeal of our neighborhood. Heat rushed to my face. That's my daughter's life support system. She can't survive without it. Margaret's expression didn't soften. "Then perhaps this isn't the right neighborhood for your family's situation." The way she said situation made my blood boil. Emma wasn't a situation. She was a brave, intelligent young woman fighting for her life every single day. "You can't be serious," I said, my voice rising. "You're asking me to hide my disabled daughter because she doesn't fit your perfect neighborhood image?" "I'm asking you to comply with the rules everyone else follows," Margaret replied coldly. "The letter outlines the violations and gives you 30 days to remedy them. If you don't comply, we'll take legal action." She turned and walked away, her heels clicking on the pavement like a countdown timer. That night, I held Emma as she cried. She'd heard every word from her spot on the porch. "Mom, maybe we should move," she whispered between sobs. "I don't want to cause problems." "Absolutely not," I said firmly. "This is our home. You have every right to sit on your own porch and breathe fresh air. Don't you ever think you're a problem." But Margaret Thornton was just getting started. Over the next few weeks, she made our lives hell. She filed noise complaints about Emma's oxygen concentrator, claiming it was too loud. She sent violations for the wheelchair ramp we'd installed, saying it wasn't approved by the architectural committee. She even called the police, claiming Emma's medical equipment was a fire hazard to the neighborhood. Each harassment campaign was worse than the last. Margaret would show up with her clipboard and measuring tape, documenting every inch of our property. She'd take photos of Emma on the porch, circle our house with her car, and encourage other neighbors to file complaints. The worst part was watching Emma retreat. She stopped sitting on the porch. She stopped reading outside. She spent her days locked in her bedroom, emerging only for doctor appointments. My vibrant daughter was disappearing and I felt powerless to stop it. I hired a lawyer, but the legal fees were draining our savings. The HOA had lawyers too, and they knew how to drag things out. Meanwhile, Emma's health was declining from the stress. The breaking point came on a rainy Thursday morning. Emma had been having a particularly difficult week, her breathing more labored than usual. I'd taken time off work to care for her, and we were both exhausted. Emma wanted to sit on the covered porch to get some air. The rain was gentle and she loved the sound of water on the roof. I helped her into her wheelchair and positioned her oxygen tank carefully beside her. We'd been outside for maybe 20 minutes when Margaret's silver BMW pulled into our driveway. She got out wearing a yellow raincoat and carrying her ever-present clipboard. "This is the final warning," she announced, marching up to the porch. Your daughter's presence here is a continued violation of our community standards. My daughter has every right to be on her own property, I said, standing between Margaret and Emma. Not when she's creating a spectacle, Margaret snapped. Look at her. This equipment, this display of illness. It's bringing down everyone's property values. Emma's face crumpled. At 16 she was old enough to understand every cruel word. Please stop, Emma whispered, her voice barely audible through the oxygen cannula. I'm not trying to hurt anyone. Margaret's face twisted with disgust. Don't you dare try to manipulate me with that pathetic voice. You and your mother are freeloaders who think disability gives you special privileges. That's enough. I shouted, but Margaret was on a roll. You want to know what I think? Margaret continued, her voice rising. I think this whole sick act is fake. I think you're milking the system for sympathy and special treatment. Real sick people don't parade around in public making everyone uncomfortable. Emma started crying, her shoulders shaking as she struggled to breathe. I reached for her, but Margaret stepped closer. Oh, here come the waterworks, Margaret sneered. How convenient. Every time someone calls out your lies, you start crying. Get away from my daughter, I warned, but Margaret was beyond reason. Your daughter is a fraud, she snarled. And I'm going to prove it in court. That's when she did the unthinkable. Margaret reached out and yanked the oxygen cannula from Emma's nose. Let's see how sick you really are without your props, she said. Emma gasped, her face immediately turning pale. She clutched her chest, struggling to breathe as I lunged to reattach her oxygen line. You're insane. I screamed, but Margaret wasn't done. Stop the act, she yelled, and then she did something that still haunts my nightmares. She slapped Emma across the face. The sound echoed across the porch like a gunshot. Emma's head snapped to the side, and she let out a small cry of pain and shock. Blood trickled from her nose where the cannula had been ripped away. For a moment time stopped. Margaret stood there, her hands still raised, a look of savage satisfaction on her face. Emma sat frozen in her wheelchair, touching her cheek in disbelief. And I saw red. I've never been a violent person, but in that moment, I wanted to tear Margaret apart with my bare hands. The only thing that stopped me was Emma's ragged breathing. My daughter needed help, not a mother in jail for assault. I reattached Emma's oxygen line with shaking hands while she gasped for air. Margaret stood there watching, not showing an ounce of remorse. I'm calling the police, I said, reaching for my phone. Go ahead, Margaret replied smugly. I'll tell them how your daughter attacked me first. Who do you think they'll believe? A respected community leader or a welfare mother with a problem child? But I was already dialing. And not just 911. I was calling my mother. I hadn't spoken to my mom in 2 years. Our relationship had been complicated ever since Dad died, made worse by the distance and my focus on Emma's medical needs. But as I watched my daughter's face swelling from Margaret's slap, I knew I needed help. Mom answered on the first ring. Sarah? What's wrong? Mom, I said, my voice breaking. I need help. Someone just assaulted Emma. There was a pause, then my mother's voice came back cold as ice. I'll be right there. The police arrived within minutes, followed by an ambulance. Margaret had disappeared by then, but not before promising me that I'd regret crossing her. Emma was taken to the hospital for observation. Her oxygen levels had dropped dangerously low, and the stress of the assault had triggered a severe breathing episode. I sat beside her bed, holding her hand as she slept, wondering how our lives had become this nightmare. My phone rang. It was my lawyer. Sarah, I have bad news. The HOA is filing an emergency injunction. They're claiming Emma's a danger to herself and others. They want her removed from the property immediately. On what grounds? They're saying today's incident proves she's mentally unstable and that her medical equipment poses a safety risk. They have 3 neighbors willing to testify that she's been acting erratically. I felt sick. That's impossible. Emma barely leaves the house. Margaret Thornton has been busy. She's convinced several neighbors that Emma is dangerous. The hearing is scheduled for tomorrow morning. I hung up and stared at Emma's sleeping face. Her cheek was still swollen, and there were bruises on her arm where Margaret had grabbed her. How had we become the villains in this story? The next morning, I helped Emma into her best dress and wheeled her into the courthouse. The room was packed with neighbors, most of whom I'd never seen before. Margaret sat at the plaintiff's table with 3 lawyers, looking confident and professional. Our lawyer, Mr. Henderson, was a kind man in his 60s who'd taken our case for a reduced fee. But as I looked at the army of legal talent across the room, I felt our chances slipping away. All rise for the Honorable Judge Patricia Wells, the bailiff announced. Judge Wells was a stern-looking woman in her 50s who reviewed the case files with a frown. Margaret's lead attorney, a sharp-dressed man named Collins, presented their case first. Your Honor, the defendants have consistently violated HOA regulations and have now escalated to violence. Yesterday, the minor child physically attacked my client, causing injury and emotional distress. I nearly fell out of my chair. That's a lie. Order. Judge Wells banged her gavel. You'll have your chance to speak. Collins continued his fabrication, painting Emma as an unstable, violent child who'd been terrorizing the neighborhood. He presented evidence of noise violations, property damage, and threatening behavior. Then came the witnesses. One by one, 3 neighbors took the stand and lied under oath. They claimed Emma had threatened them, that her medical equipment was dangerous, that she'd been screaming obscenities at children. Every word was false, but they delivered their testimony with convincing sincerity. The worst was Mrs. Patterson, an elderly woman who lived 2 houses down. That poor girl seems so angry, she said, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. She sits on that porch just glaring at everyone who walks by. Last week, she threw something at my grandson when he rode his bike past their house. Emma gripped my hand tighter. We both knew she'd been inside all last week, too sick to leave her room. Then Margaret took the stand. She was a masterful liar. She painted herself as a concerned neighbor who tried to help our family, only to be met with hostility and violence. She claimed Emma had attacked her without provocation, that I'd encouraged the assault, and that we were both mentally unstable. I've never seen such hatred in a child's eyes, Margaret said, her voice trembling with fake emotion. She looked at me like she wanted to kill me. I was terrified. The judge was listening intently, occasionally nodding. I could see our case falling apart. Then it was our turn. Mr. Henderson did his best, but we had no witnesses. The neighbors who'd been kind to Emma were suddenly unavailable, or had changed their minds about testifying. The police report from yesterday was incomplete, focusing more on Emma's medical emergency than Margaret's assault. When Emma took the stand, she was barely audible through her oxygen cannula. Her voice shook as she tried to explain what had really happened, but Collins objected to everything she said. Your Honor, the child is clearly coached and her testimony is unreliable due to her medical condition affecting her mental state. That's not true. I shouted, but Judge Wells silenced me with a look. Emma started crying, her breathing becoming labored. I wanted to rush to her side, but the bailiff held me back. I'm not lying, Emma whispered. I never hurt anyone. I just want to sit on my porch and read my books. But I could see the judge wasn't convinced. The lies were too detailed, too coordinated. Margaret had planned this perfectly. Collins began his closing argument, demanding that Emma be removed from the property immediately for the safety of the community. He painted us as dangerous troublemakers who'd manipulated the system with fake medical claims. The evidence is clear, Your Honor. This family has shown complete disregard for community standards and has now escalated to violence. The neighborhood children are at risk. Property values are declining. Something must be done before someone gets seriously hurt. Mr. Henderson's closing was weak by comparison. He focused on Emma's medical needs and our property rights, but he couldn't counter the mountain of false testimony. Judge Wells was about to render her verdict when the courtroom doors burst open. A woman in a black suit walked in, her heels clicking on the marble floor. She was tall and elegant, with silver hair pulled back in a perfect bun. Her presence commanded immediate attention. I apologize for the interruption, Your Honor, she said in a voice that carried absolute authority. I'm here on behalf of the defendants. Margaret's face went white. Who is that? The woman approached the bench, handed Judge Wells a folder, and whispered something in her ear. The judge's eyebrows shot up as she read whatever was in the folder. Court will recess for 15 minutes, Judge Wells announced, looking shaken. As the courtroom buzzed with confusion, the woman in black turned to me and smiled. Hello, Sarah. I'm sorry I'm late. Was my mother. But this wasn't the mother I remembered. Gone was the quiet woman who'd raised me in our small-town home. This woman radiated power and danger in equal measure. Her eyes, the same blue as Emma's, were cold as Arctic ice. Mom? I whispered. What's going on? I'll explain later, she said, kneeling beside Emma's wheelchair. Are you okay, sweetheart? Emma nodded, but she was staring at her grandmother with amazement. Grandma, you look different. I've been away on business, Mom said gently. But I'm here now, and no one is going to hurt you ever again. Margaret had been watching this exchange with growing alarm. She approached us with her lawyers in tow. "I don't know who you think you are," Margaret said, "but this is a private matter between residents of our community." My mother stood slowly and turned to face Margaret. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Margaret N. Thornton," Mom said, her voice cutting through the courtroom chatter. 47 years old. Lives at 1247 Maple Street. Married to Robert Thornton, who works for Henderson Financial Group. 2 children, Jessica, 19, currently attending Northwestern University, and Michael, 16, who attends Willowbrook High School. Margaret's face went pale. "How do you know?" "Your social security number is 555-78-9823, Mom continued. "Your mother's maiden name is Richards. You have a fear of spiders and a scar on your left ankle from a childhood bicycle accident. This is harassment." Margaret sputtered. "I'm calling the police." "Oh, the police are already here," Mom said with a cold smile. "Detective Martinez is right outside. He's very interested in your little insurance fraud scheme." The blood drained from Margaret's face. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Really?" "Because I have documentation of your workers' compensation claims for a back injury that never happened. Quite remarkable how you were able to play tennis 3 times a week while claiming total disability." Margaret's lawyer grabbed her arm. "Don't say another word." But Mom wasn't finished. "And then there's the embezzlement from the HOA funds. $200,000 over 3 years. You've been very clever about hiding it, but not clever enough." "That's impossible," Margaret whispered. "How could you know about?" "Know about what?" Mom asked innocently. "I thought you didn't know what I was talking about." Judge Wells returned to the bench, her expression grim. "I've reviewed the documents provided by Miss Cooper. The charges against the defendants are hereby dismissed. Furthermore, I'm ordering an immediate investigation into the HOA's practices and finances." Margaret began to panic. "Your Honor, this is a conspiracy. These people are trying to—" "Miss Thornton," Judge Wells interrupted, "I suggest you speak with your attorney about your legal situation. Court is adjourned." As the gavel came down, chaos erupted. Margaret was screaming about conspiracies and cover-ups while her lawyers tried to silence her. The neighbors who'd lied under oath were slipping toward the exits. And my mother stood in the center of it all, calm as a statue. Detective Martinez entered the courtroom and approached Margaret with handcuffs. "Margaret Thornton, you're under arrest for insurance fraud, embezzlement, and assault on a minor." "This is insane." Margaret shrieked as the cuffs clicked into place. "You can't do this to me. I'm a respected member of this community." "Ma'am, you have the right to remain silent," Detective Martinez said. "I suggest you use it." As Margaret was led away, she caught sight of my mother and her expression changed from panic to pure terror. "Who are you?" she whispered. My mother smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I'm Emma's grandmother. And you made a very big mistake." Outside the courthouse I finally got answers. "Mom, what just happened in there?" I asked as we sat in her rental car. Emma was in the back seat, still processing everything. "I work for the government, Sarah," Mom said simply. "I have for the past 20 years. "What kind of government work?" "The kind that involves protecting people who can't protect themselves." I stared at her. "Are you saying you're some kind of spy?" "I'm saying I have resources that most people don't. When you called me yesterday, I made some phone calls of my own. It's amazing what you can learn about someone when you know where to look." "But the fraud, the embezzlement, how did you know?" "Because when someone hurts my family, I make it my business to know everything about them. Margaret Thornton has been stealing from that HOA for years. She's also been filing false insurance claims and intimidating anyone who tried to question her." Emma leaned forward from the back seat. "Grandma, are you like a secret agent?" Mom turned to smile at her granddaughter. "I'm like a guardian angel, sweetheart. But with better computer skills." Over the next few weeks, Margaret's world collapsed. The investigation revealed years of fraud, theft, and intimidation. She'd been using her position as HOA president to steal from the community funds while silencing anyone who questioned her with threats and harassment. But that wasn't the end of it. The neighbors who'd lied under oath were also investigated. Mrs. Patterson was found to have been paid $500 for her false testimony. The other 2 faced perjury charges. The entire HOA board was dissolved and replaced. Margaret was sentenced to 5 years in prison for fraud and embezzlement. The assault on Emma added another year to her sentence. But the real justice came when the HOA's insurance company refused to cover the lawsuit damages. Margaret's house was seized to pay restitution to the families she'd defrauded. She lost everything. Emma and I stayed in our house. The new HOA board formally apologized and rescinded all the violations Margaret had filed. Our neighbors, the real ones who'd been too afraid to speak up before, finally came forward with their support. Emma began sitting on the porch again, reading her books and waving at passers-by. Children would stop to chat with her, fascinated by her stories and courage. She became the heart of our little community. My mother visited more often, though she was still mysterious about her work. She'd take Emma on special trips to museums and libraries, teaching her about history and languages. She'd also given Emma a small device that looked like a phone. "It's a direct line to me," Mom explained. "If anyone ever bothers you again, just press the red button." Emma never had to use it, but knowing it was there gave her confidence. 6 months later, I received a letter from Margaret in prison. She claimed she'd been framed, that my mother was part of some government conspiracy, and that she'd been the real victim all along. I threw the letter away without finishing it. The truth was, Margaret had been the victim of her own cruelty. She'd chosen to target a disabled child because she thought we were powerless. She'd never imagined that Emma's grandmother was someone who'd spent her career protecting the innocent from bullies exactly like her. As I watched Emma playing in our front yard with the neighborhood children, I realized that Margaret had been wrong about something else too. Emma wasn't a burden or a problem to be hidden away. She was a blessing, a source of joy and inspiration to everyone who knew her. The oxygen tank and wheelchair weren't symbols of illness or weakness. They were symbols of strength, of a young woman who refused to give up despite impossible odds. And now, thanks to my mother's intervention, Emma could live her life without fear. She could sit on her porch, play with her friends, and dream about her future. Margaret Thornton had thought she was dealing with a helpless family. Instead, she discovered that when you mess with the wrong person's granddaughter, you might find yourself facing forces you never imagined existed. Emma was safe. Justice had been served. And somewhere in the world, my mother was probably protecting another family from another bully. Some guardian angels carry harps. Others carry government clearance and the ability to make your life disappear. I preferred the latter. The end came not with revenge, but with peace. Emma graduated high school with honors, went to college, and became a children's rights advocate. She still uses oxygen equipment, but now she travels the country speaking to kids about overcoming obstacles and standing up to bullies. And every time she tells her story, she mentions her grandmother who taught her that family will always protect family no matter what. Margaret Thornton learned that lesson the hard way. Some battles you simply cannot win. Especially when you're fighting someone's granddaughter, and that someone happens to be one of the most dangerous people in the world. The HOA Karen had picked the wrong family to mess with. And in the end, justice wasn't just served. It was delivered by a woman who'd spent her career making sure the innocent were protected from people exactly like Margaret. Emma's breathing was steady now, her laughter filling our home. And every night as I tucked her into bed, I whispered a prayer of gratitude for the mysterious woman who'd raised me, protected us both, and reminded me that family bonds are stronger than any bully's hatred. The nightmare was over. The healing could finally begin.